You're listening to Eating for Eden, episode 40. When it comes to doing something about climate change, your food choices matter. Thanks for tuning in to Eating for Eden, a podcast that takes a food-first approach to climate action. I'm your host, Jessica J. Schroeder, and I am passionate about food that tastes good and does good. I'll guide you with practical tips and help you thoroughly enjoy your food along the way. Happy New Year! Is it still okay to say that? When do we stop? Anyway, you're listening to the third episode in a 4-part series for January I'm calling Progress Over Perfection. At a time of year when many of us start new things with gusto, only to burn out a month or two later, I want to encourage an approach that is realistic, sustainable, and grace-filled. Eating more plant-based is a worthy goal. Taking an intentional approach will set you up best for success. Make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or whatever platform you're listening on to be sure you don't miss part 4 next week and all that's to come afterward. I have several guest interviews on the books which you won't want to miss. Before diving into today's episode, I wanted to tell you that I've developed a resource to help you maximize what you get out of this series. And for a limited time, listeners can receive 25% off with the code PROGRESS25 at checkout. That's PROGRESS25. Head over to the store at edenandme.com to check out this beginner's guide to eating plant-based. See the show notes for a link. Also, if you'd like to work together for additional support beyond the podcast and self-directed guide, let me know. Shoot me an email. I offer one-on-one coaching, and I'd love to connect with you to see how I can help you build intentional habits toward worthy goals. Reach out to me at edenandme@substack.com for more information. This email address is also in the show notes. Okay, with that, let's dive into our third Progress Over Perfection episode. Part 3, Forget the Labels. Let me start by letting you in on a little secret. What you call yourself or what you call your way of eating is not as important as you may imagine. While it certainly can feel nice to belong to a tribe, tribalism tends to divide more than unite. Moreover, singular words or terms tend to carry a span of possible interpretations with them, and too often they result in misunderstanding. Telling someone you're paleo, gluten-free, vegetarian, or even vegan may have different effects than you intend. You may mean one set of things when you say that word. The person receiving it may think a different set of things. As an example, if someone claims to be gluten-free, she may mean that she has celiac disease and must avoid all gluten. But someone hearing her call herself gluten-free might jump to conclusions, assuming she jumped on the gluten-free bandwagon and mistakenly thinks it's inherently healthier to eat this way, perhaps merely substituting gluten-free ultra-processed foods for their glutinous cousins. In essence, simple labels lack nuance and detail. They're likely to cause misinterpretation, even though they're meant to be clear. Also, as already mentioned, labels tend to divide. They declare someone as on a certain team, so to speak, and thus it is assumed, even if this is not actually the case, that the person is therefore against other teams or tribes, and the individuals comprising those tribes. A simple example would be to assume that someone describing their dietary pattern as vegan would be, quote, against someone self-describing as keto, just because those on low-carb diets tend to eat a significant amount of animal products. But a keto dietary pattern doesn't require animal products. Keto is defined by the proportion of fats and protein consumed compared to carbohydrates. But even if the keto person does consume animal products and thus has a dietary pattern with core points of application that are at odds with the vegan's dietary choices, which would be avoiding all animal products and byproducts, it doesn't hold that the person eating a vegan diet must be against the person eating keto. People can differ on what dietary approaches they choose to eat without being against, antagonistic toward, others as people. It is possible to disagree about ideas and lifestyle approaches while still affirming a fellow human being's value. All that said, tribalism is often blind to this reality. It is far easier to carelessly throw darts at those outside one's own tribe. If I'm right, they must be wrong, many think. But there's a lot of false logic at play there. Without spending too much time on diet tribes, I will sum up these thoughts by saying, I tend to advocate creating an opportunity for connection and conversation over relying on labels. Okay, so eschewing diet tribalism is all well and good, but what about describing to others how you actually eat? When others are hosting you for a meal and ask about dietary restrictions or preferences, what should you say? When asked about the way you choose to eat, rather than focusing on a particular label, emphasize the positive values that your way of eating promotes, such as bodily and planetary health. Share what first got you interested and why it's important to you. When people ask about my way of eating, I tend to say that I eat plant predominant to plant exclusive, explaining that I'm not 100% plant exclusive, but I tend to eat plant exclusive at home. I don't eat meat anymore, and while I do occasionally have a bit of dairy or fish, it is on rare occasions. I'll talk about both the nutrition and the environmental aspects of this and frame eating as an act of stewardship. This often stirs positive curiosity in those with whom I share it, and we often find common ground, even if my approach is new to them. I realize that kind of response takes a lot more breath and time to give than simply throwing out a label that others will easily understand, but perhaps that's a good thing. Rather than dropping a label and hoping that your hearer will interpret it as you hope they will, giving a bit more of a nuanced answer invites the opportunity for you to say more. Additionally, while simply dropping a label might put a halt to conversation, providing a thoughtful, nuanced answer, threaded with bits of your own story, is far more likely to launch into a meaningful conversation. Your hearers may become curious. Reducing your meat and dairy intake? Tell me more about that. They might ask, do you miss the foods you're cutting out? What are you eating instead? Etc. While such an approach is admittedly more difficult to describe, one of the beautiful things about it is that it allows you to have an actual conversation. Rather than simply tossing out a term, such as keto, vegan, carnivore, whatever, with little to no context, you automatically have an opportunity to share why you're choosing to eat the way that you are. I also find it's an added benefit to be in a place that keeps you humble and vulnerable. There's something powerful for both you and others when you open up about something new you're trying and tie it to your values, not to mention values that you probably hope those you're talking to would hold as well. Getting a bit more practical, how do you talk to others about the dietary changes you're making? Let's say that you're cutting out red meat entirely, but you're still open to eating poultry and fish. If a friend is going to host you for dinner, you might tell them, hey, I just wanted to let you know that I've decided to stop eating red meat. I just can't ignore how harmful it is to the environment. I wanted to give you a heads up as you're planning the meal. Would you be okay with avoiding red meat? Or if you're going further and avoiding meat, all meat entirely, you might say something like, hey, I don't want to make the meal planning and meal prep difficult for you, but I've recently decided to stop eating meat because of the high emissions footprint it has. If you're up for cooking a plant-forward meal, that would be really terrific. I can offer some ideas if you'd like any input. I also understand if you still want to have some meat available. I'm willing to bring something to contribute if that would be helpful. Or maybe you're planning a place to meet up with friends for dinner at a restaurant. If they suggest something like a barbecue joint or a Texas Roadhouse where meat is the central focus and there are precious few options for the plant-based diner, you might toss out a few additional suggestions, saying something like, hey, I understand if you're really set on X restaurant, but just in case you're open to other suggestions, I thought I'd put a few others on the table. I just started reducing my meat and dairy intake due to its negative impact on the environment. Would you be open to considering a restaurant that has some plant-forward options on the menu? A few I found are, and list off a few ideas. And if you need more help navigating, specifically how to eat plant predominant at restaurants, check out my tips in episode 14. Overall, be kind and clear as you communicate and show your willingness to help minimize inconvenience for others. If you're generous and not demanding in your communication, others will likely be willing to accommodate. Keep in mind that as much as you might not want to, quote, stir the pot, taking the opportunity to voice the dietary changes you're making helps bring this important issue to the front of mind for others. We need more of us to be made aware of this issue. Our planet simply cannot sustain the current demand for animal products. We need to reduce our consumption of them. So don't shy away from talking about it. We need you to stick to your commitment, and we need to invite others to join in as well. As I wrap up, I realize that even as I advocate for lengthier, more nuanced descriptions of how we are choosing to eat, some kind of terminology is still vital, at least as a starting point. You may come up with your own creative ideas for describing your journey, but if you need a couple of ideas, I'll provide two. First, you might consider adopting the term reducitarian, coined by Brian Cateman, editor of the book The Reducitarian Solution. This places emphasis on both the intention and action of reducing intake of high-emission foods, particularly meat. Since this term is likely little known beyond those who are already adopting the approach, using such a term has a built-in opportunity for you to explain and thus talk about the important changes you're making. I want to encourage you. Don't feel like you have to apologize for yourself or your choices. You have an opportunity to share about something that is meaningful enough to you to drive intentional food choices. See it as an opportunity to teach others and invite them into curiosity about the bigger conversation of food and climate change. Second, you might consider saying something like, I'm working on eating more plant-based. While I offer the term plant-based as an option, I also want to encourage you to recognize the inherent lack of clarity in this terminology. It is a term that is now being used quite broadly in lots of circumstances. Some use it to mean free from animal products, 100%, while others mean it as coming from plants, even if only a shy majority of 51%. This cultural haziness doesn't make the term meaningless, however. As I explained in episode 18, I choose to use the term plant-based, but I do so with appropriate explanation. So in a way, the use of this term is an invitation to clarify what you mean, and thus to start a conversation, as I have encouraged us to do. Well, I think that does us for this week. If you missed parts 1 and 2 of this series, you can find those linked in the show notes as episodes 38 and 39. Also, don't forget to check out my new ebook, The Beginner's Guide to Eating Plant-Based, linked in the show notes as well. Remember that you can get 25% off with code PROGRESS25 for a limited time. If you have questions or want to suggest a topic for a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to edenandme@substack.com. Also, if you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider leaving a review. I'd love to grow the reach of this podcast in 2025, and I need your help to do so. So thank you in advance. If you want recipes, head over to edenandme.com, where you can find a variety of delicious recipes to bring what you're learning into the kitchen. Finally, become an email subscriber on Substack to have new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you appreciate the work I'm doing and want to support the show, you'll also have the option of becoming a paid subscriber. That's all for now, friends. Until next time, be well. Thanks for listening to Eating for Eden. If you found this episode informative or inspiring, please consider sharing it with a friend. Climate change is an issue we all need to tackle together, so let's invite others to journey along with us as we continue the conversation and start taking action. Until next week, friends, take care.